They say that all empires are doomed to inevitably fall. No matter what heights, what greatness a civilization may achieve, it inevitably becomes overstretched. Or perhaps it grows corrupt. Or perhaps it develops too many enemies. By some ways or means, an empire which once held the world at its fingertips can come crashing down. But why? Why do empires always seem to collapse? Is the circumstance economic? Is it military? Is it political? Is it cultural or social? The subject is widely debated and perhaps most famously is manifest in the question of why did Rome fall? But this question and even its answer are applicable to virtually every dominant empire throughout at least Western history. Now, what I mean by dominant empire is an empire which held hegemony over all surrounding territories or all surrounding kingdoms, civilizations, even rival empires. This would be entities like Rome, which dominated virtually all of Europe, save for some Germanic tribes and some petty kingdoms. The Romans were, of course, rivaled by the Persians to the far east, but the Persians wouldn't really hold any major foothold in Europe during that time, with the majority of Roman-Persian rivalries being concentrated in the Near East. This theory need not even be applied purely to massive empires, but merely successful civilizations. Civilizations which, for a long stretch of time, appeared to be doing quite well for themselves and achieved significant heights of quality of life, economic development, social progress, geopolitical prestige, whatever it might be, but for some seemingly inexplicable reason, at some point faces a sharp decline and inevitably a collapse. Just because empires always seem to face collapse doesn't mean you need to, though. A sign of the times you might have heard about is declining testosterone levels among men, and this idea that men are becoming weaker, even feminized in the modern day, and society only seems to want to encourage that, keeping you docile and easier to control. Well now, today's sponsor, Black Forest Supplements, gives you a shot at breaking free from that with their Turkesterone supplement, now with the addition of one of the most talked about testosterone boosting supplements out there, Tongkat Ali. In a time and age when everything seems to be geared against young guys just trying to be guys, Turkesterone and Tongkat Ali go a long way to combating the softening effects of a comfortable, sedentary life of junk food and who knows what else gets slipped into the food these days. Black Forest Supplements is offering all of you a natural way to boost your testosterone, increase your strength, improve your fat loss, and decrease your stress. Does my voice sound deeper than the rest of the video? That's the magic of this product. Except it's not magic, it's scientastic. Black Forest Supplements are not guaranteed to make your voice deeper. Take advantage of this limited time offer and this limited time product while it lasts, and when you use my link in the description below, you'll get an exclusive buy two get one free deal. Don't let anyone tell you being strong is wrong. Don't let your empire fall, and don't let your tap water turn you into a girly man. Click the link in the description now. And with that, let's get right back to the video. An expression I've come to use in discussions of this subject is victim of their own success. Now, what is meant to say that someone is a victim of their own success? Well, oftentimes when it comes to these civilizations, we'll see their collapse or attribute their collapse to some type of mass military defeat or invasion or conquest of some sort. But how was the civilization able to be conquered so easily? We turn back the clock on any number of these civilizations when we find that at an earlier point, under normal circumstances, there would have been no reason to assume that this empire could be invaded, conquered, defeated in such a way. So this would suggest that unless there was some type of external sabotage or pressure over a long period of time, whatever caused the decline of these civilizations needed to be internal. And very often we will hear that internal degradation is something that takes root, whether it is political corruption, whether it is social degeneracy, or weakness in a general population. This is where the concept of being a victim of one's own success comes into play. A successful civilization, a successful empire, will often be able to raise the standard of living for the majority of its population. With a lot of these civilizations, a lot of these countries, a lot of these empires, we find that they have relatively humble beginnings. through some form of struggle, some form of perseverance, that humble population is able to raise itself up to a degree of power and is able to use that power and some type of unique position to topple its enemies, to consolidate the territory surrounding them, to strengthen itself into the mighty empire that it would eventually become. At that point, the circumstances which would have contributed to the population having this humble background, to needing to undergo these circumstances and these conditions to strengthen themselves, to become a mightier people, a mightier civilization, they get pushed aside because they're no longer necessary. If the standard of living is increased, if there is more wealth, you don't need to have a civilization of farmers turned warriors. The general population, rather than adapting themselves to hardship and through that becoming stronger, instead adapt to the circumstances of wealth, the circumstances of a strong imperial country, of a country with a high quality of life, a country capable of providing for its people to a high capacity. For many of these countries, many of their militaristic roots, many of their warrior roots originated from need. The need for food, the need to fend off a hostile enemy, the need for more land, some form of survival. And survival, of course, is not optional. Survival is something which is either done or it is not. But once that civilization no longer needs to struggle for its survival, it no longer has the drive to pursue certain heights to survive, once survival is virtually guaranteed, it ceases to be a drive that pushes a population to those extreme measures, those extreme levels of strength. But it is also supplemented by something else. With increased wealth, with a population no longer needing to worry about its survival, that population is able to focus on other endeavors. It's able to explore the sciences, technologies, the types of technology that would allow the civilization to grow stronger, to better compete with its enemies, whether that is on an economic front or a military front, or more often than not a combination of multiple fronts. So the struggling civilization is able to develop a warrior spirit, and it is very effective at consolidating the territory around it and fortifying itself. But as the quality of life goes up, that warrior spirit begins to decline because it is no longer necessary for survival. It is no longer a consistent drive across the population. However, with this decline, there is also an increase in the capacity and abilities of the civilization to conquer, because it is now more technologically advanced, because its population has access to more means, that there's more that they can do. If it is a wise civilization, if the population is able to make the proper investments, this will lead to a continued period of expansion, of conquest, and of increased quality of life. At this point, however, you will begin to see reforms, changes to way the civilization structures itself and coordinates itself. Certain extreme practices which in the past were necessary for survival are now seen as antiquated. Survival is no longer a fear. Whether or not we will survive to the next day is no longer a concern, and many of the barriers put in place for the sake of survival are lifted. Well, these things are obstructive. We no longer need to live in such a society. We can open up the doors to this and that. We can be more free. We can enjoy ourselves more. The society, in essence, becomes more idealistic. It increasingly ceases to argue what is necessary for survival, and instead begins to argue what can be done. How can we make the world better? How can we make our day-to-day more ideal? What can we do to increase our quality of life, to increase our pleasure, to increase our happiness? In many circumstances, that sense of happiness extends to a moral happiness. How can I be more of a giving person? How can I be more charitable? How can I be more this, that, or the other? In many cases, this can be very beneficial to the community. It can lead to a community of very high trust between individuals, where sharing and cooperation are very, very common. However, those sentiments, while beneficial within that community, are also something of a liability, because while that community would come to share those values, a separate community, a separate civilization, a separate state, empire, kingdom, does not share those values. It has not achieved that level of development. It is still lacking. Survival is much more important to them, and in their eyes, they see a population with resources. They see a population that is very charitable, that is just willing to give, a population that doesn't have a sense of urgency, a sense of danger about them. This population which does have this sense for survival, this sense that it needs more, will exploit that population. That exploitation could be passive, or it could be aggressive and come in the form of conquest. Here's a population that is very idealistic, does not see many threats beyond its borders, trusts just about all of their surrounding neighbors. Here comes this population that is hostile, and the empire is conquered. Now that is one way in which this idealism could manifest, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the only way in which this manifests. You can have multiple different manifestations of idealism within a society. You could also have a manifestation of extreme greed, a manifestation of extreme hedonism or laze within a society, where the warrior spirit has instead been supplemented by a desire for conquest of a more petty variety. No longer is the desire to gain resources for survival, for the betterment of the community, for the betterment of the population. It becomes a matter of, oh, what can I acquire to make myself happy in this moment? What can I do to satisfy myself in this moment? And the true danger of this manifestation of idealism is that no longer is the focus on productive ventures. It is all merely a matter of pleasure seeking for the sake of the self. And the danger in that is that if you begin a civilization, you begin a society with this concept of everyone sort of banding together for the sake of survival, everyone sort of working together for the initial betterment of the community, and that shifts to a position of individuals only seeking their own betterment and disregarding the well-being of all else, you're going to have a fragmentation of the social order. Because while once all the moving pieces of the machine were satisfied to work together for each other's betterment, now the individual pieces can decide whether or not they want to be involved, and more often than not, they would much rather enjoy themselves than to work toward the betterment of the greater community. I've spoken before about how society, civilization itself, has an idealizing effect upon the minds of a public. Generation after generation, it increases so long as the quality of life and the standard of living remains fairly high and gradually increases generation after generation. And I've spoken before about how the survival mindset and the idealist mindset are the cores of what could be called conservative and liberal thought. Now, some might interpret this to mean that conservatism is the ultimate good, and conservatism alone can keep the civilization going in perpetuity. This is not what I am saying. Remember that there is an initial increase thanks to that warrior spirit, that drive for survival. However, that survival mindset, that conservative mindset, is extremely opposed to change. It will reach a cap very early on and stagnate afterwards. It's only because you have that increase in the standard of living and that rise in idealism that you have technological innovations, that you have people saying, well, we've always done things this way, what if we tried doing things that way instead? It is from that you have technological innovation. It is from that you have new ideas and ways of thinking of how things could be done better. What goes hand in hand with that, however, is much of the liberalizing ideals, the challenging of old traditions, the challenging of old values and barriers to certain behaviors. Afghanistan might be a good example of this, where the Afghans are able to reach a certain level of survival. They're not being conquered by anybody, but they are at something of a plateau. Developmentally, there is not very much going on in Afghanistan. On the flip side of that, you have highly urbanized, highly advanced civilizations like those of South Korea and Japan. South Korea is something of an exception to the rule because of the existence of North Korea and the hostility which exists between the two. But by and large, Japan and South Korea are also in a situation where they are under the essential protective umbrella of the United States. One might extend this analogy to much of Western Europe as well, where there is a very high level of development. Once again, you have a situation where the United States is essentially providing for the defense of these countries. And ever since the aftermath of the Second Great War, throughout the Cold War period, you've seen generation after generation an increasing idealism among the population. This sense of, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? As a result, the quality of life in Western Europe has been able to rise substantially, but the idealism is also significantly increased as well, to the point that Europe, if it was left on its own today, with no support from the United States, would be in a very precarious position, facing threats from virtually all sides. The war between Russia and Ukraine is serving as something of a wake-up call for a lot of Europe, the sense that there is a threat right on their doorstep, and this is now motivating more conservative, quote-unquote conservative sentiments about militarization, sentiments about securing borders, sentiments about keeping out foreign influence. As civilizations grow more powerful, as they raise their standard of living, as they become more idealistic, they also cripple themselves. They remove that core feature, that survival mindset, that initial strength, that is eroded generation after generation, leading the state, the civilization, the empire, to grow weaker and weaker. By and large, they're able to maintain themselves for a time because there has been generations of investment made, whether it is in defenses, whether it is in the social infrastructure, whether it is just in the technology that is allowing for a high standard of living. However, without the willpower, without the drives to maintain these things, to preserve them, to ensure their security, you will eventually inevitably have, a collapse. Very often, the most successful empires, those empires which seem to be unstoppable, will collapse because they are victims of their own success. Thank you all for watching. This has been Mr. Z. Do like the video if you enjoyed it. We have videos like this every week, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Mr. Z, out.